Howdy.
Hey.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Hi guys. Thank you for joining us. I'm gonna record our conversation.
Sounds
so I
good.
Can put it in my newsletter tomorrow. Let's start here. You guys actually made some news this morning, which is a new $1.5 million investment in the program you have to expand free rides, not just now to victims and first responders, to disaster relief, but also to veterans who are coming home and low-income folks who are going into a job interview. It seems to me like this sort of do-good mentality, this Lyft for the greater good, is one of the key areas in which you differentiate yourself, or try to differentiate yourself from Uber. Do I have that right? Is that part of the grand strategy to say, we're Lyft, we're different?
Well, the Lyft's mission is to improve people's lives with the world's best transportation. It's not simply to build the world's best transportation, because we don't think that's enough. I think a lot of times in business, people focus on the what are you doing? But for us, the why is critical. I don't get excited about just doing the what unless the why is clear. And so Lyft relief rides and today's commitment to expand that to $1.5 million of spend over the next year is part of that. It's why we exist. It is something that our team is passionate about, and it's something that we're going to continue. And
you've also recently done carbon offsets. Is there a question for you for how you prioritize this? Is in terms of that sort of do-good agenda? Is climate most important? Is disaster relief most important? What else might you have down the line in terms of some of these projects?
So I'd say the most important thing that we do on the kind of social impact side is centered around the people that are part of our business and the impact that we are having. If we can have a greater benefit, then we'll do that as well. But for example, the carbon offset is looking at our long-term goal is to make sure that there are no emissions related or very few emissions related to our transportation system. And until we have long-range electric vehicles and likely autonomous vehicles, we'll be unable to get fully there. So we need to take a real action. And we had a multi-million-dollar commitment to investing in real projects within the United States to offset those emissions. So that's core to who we are. Taking care of drivers is core to our business. And so I think it's important. And then we use the kind of superpower of transportation that is what we are to also provide value to the communities we serve. So we also sometimes go outside of our core when we feel like there's an issue that's really important, like the $1 million donation to the ACLU during the travel ban. But I think things that are centered around where our business is having impact and where we can make the biggest difference is how we prioritize.
Do you feel like you have a full picture of how well Lyft is doing against Uber? Because you report somewhere between 1 million to 2 million daily rides in the United States. They report 15 million daily rides, but that's globally. And I'm not sure they even put out numbers just for the United States or North America. So do you actually have a picture right now of how Lyft is doing versus Uber?
Yeah, we have a pretty clear picture. We believe that we're about 35% market share in the United States. That's up from probably 12% a couple of years ago. So not only is Lyft growing incredibly quickly, we did nearly 50 million rides in the month of March, but we're growing significantly faster than Uber.
How do you think the guys at Uber feel about you?
You'll have to ask them.
I will. Yeah. I'll be sure to do that. It seems, the reason I ask is, it seems to me in the wake of the delete Uber scandal, in the wake of the delete Facebook, and all the Cambridge Analytica stuff, it seems to me there's a really big premium being put right now on the values of a company, and that companies have to sort of telegraph that. And if you look at what Dara is doing at Uber, there's a clear emphasis now on signaling to everyone, we're a better company, we're a more mature company, we have moved on from the Travis Kalanick days. And I wonder if at their scale, if they start getting hip to this idea of giving free rides to veterans, of offsetting carbon emissions, if all of a sudden that's a threat to your growth.
I mean, if more companies, Uber aside, if more companies see the value in doing good as it ties to building a good business, then we're happy with that. Okay. If we can be the leader demonstrating...
Savvy answer.
If we can lead and demonstrate, and frankly, 2 years ago, we were in a very difficult and different place, right? Everyone said it's a winner-take-all market. Uber's going to win, Lyft's going to die. And they said, Lyft, because Lyft's too nice. They care too much about people. They're not building a good business. And so if we can flip that narrative and convince entrepreneurs and convince companies that you have to do good in the communities you serve in order to have a successful business, then I'd say we're winning.
So I do, but I want to move on. I want to talk about the future of a driverless world. But first, there is sort of one very uncomfortable statistic, which my colleagues at CNN highlighted just yesterday, which was their findings that more than 103 drivers had been accused of Uber drivers had been accused of sexual assault. Uber took the headlines, but down there was also the fact that Lyft has been dealing with this problem as well. And if you consider that you have something like 35% market share, the ratio, that's a serious problem for you guys too. How do you address a business where you are relying on strangers to drive around strangers and this issue of sexual assault and abuse?
Yeah, well, I'd say this is an issue that is a problem for society. The fact that this exists is not okay. And
but are you and it's the same question, are you responsible for that?
Yeah. I'd say, so one incident is too many in society, and one incident is too many on our platform. When we started Lyft, we said, how could we create a service that we'd feel good about and safe about putting our loved ones into a Lyft ride? I want my wife to use the service. My daughter's 2, but someday she will use the service alone, right. And I want her to be safe. And so from the very beginning, we were the first to put criminal background checks in place for the industry, driving record checks that were more strict than what taxis and limos had done previously, and $1 million insurance liability policy that we manuscripted, meaning we had to create from scratch because one didn't exist for this type of new service. So safety has been in the core of what we've done. If you think about previous forms, let's talk about taxis and black cars and limos, that transaction for the most part was anonymous. You didn't have accounts, you didn't have ratings, and so there was a lot of anonymity that has been erased by the way that we approach it with Lyft. But we should all be doing more, and when there are opportunities to do more, we should continue to do that. Okay,
let's talk about the future, which is always the most exciting thing to talk about. 2 years ago, you wrote a really exciting piece, a Medium post, about what the future of a sort of world of driverless cars looked like. And correct me if I'm wrong, but at that point you said in 5 years, so 2021, the majority of Lyft rides would be autonomous vehicles, and that by 2025, was it that no one would own cars anymore?
It won't make economic sense to own a car in a major urban environment.
Okay. So that's really exciting. I also, I read everything Elon Musk says, so I'm very familiar with missed deadlines. That seems to me to be an extremely optimistic deadline. I live in Los Angeles. I'm very familiar with how many people still, own a car, drive a car. Do you still feel like we're 3 years out from the majority of your rides being autonomous? And what is that, 8 years out, 7 years out from a world where it doesn't make sense to own a car?
Yeah, so I'd say I'll go in reverse order
okay.
On the one that's a little longer out. So I feel extremely confident that it will not make financial sense to own a car in that time frame, and I actually believe that we may be able to push that forward. For certain people in certain cities where it's really expensive to own a car, let's say New York because of parking, it already doesn't make financial sense.
Right.
And then other cities, maybe San Francisco, for the majority of folks, I think if they knew the exact economics, it wouldn't make financial sense. So I feel extremely confident that Lyft Line, which is our shared ride product, is more affordable. Call it about a $7 or $8 ride. I think there are improvements to be made to that product that can bring it to a $5 or $6 ride. So that is line of sight within reach. On the autonomous side, there are certain things we control and certain things we don't control. So if we were in control of all the variables, I have high confidence in the 3 years. But I think it could be, it could take a little longer depending on the regulatory framework and depending on the cost curves on certain sensors.
And you don't worry just about it's an American value. It seems to me to increasingly be a global value. Just this sort of love of car ownership, the sense of being able to cut out on the weekend, not having to rely on strangers, having that space to yourself. The identity politics that go into owning a car and the kind of car you own. It seems to me when I think about the incredible disposable income just in places like San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, and Seattle, and so on, you are always going to have people who are going to want to have a car. So
I'm not worried about that, and I would counter that with the idea that, yes, the car in America has symbolized freedom, but the reality of the car over the last few years has not been freeing. You know, you see a commercial with someone with the wind blowing in their hair on a highway with no cars on it, and their hand out the window. Right. That is not real.
No.
That is freedom we would all love, but that is not real.
Yeah,
the real
thing is the 101 on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah, it's like a $9,000. The car is now a $9,000 annual expense. So it's like a $9,000 ball and chain where you are tied to it. You have to park it. A third of traffic in some cities is because people are looking for parking. This is not freeing. This is, and more as young people come of age, they're waiting longer to get their license, they're using their smartphone, and it is more freeing to use Lyft. And as we introduce the idea of subscriptions, where you can subscribe to a miles plan instead of a minutes plan on your phone, or similar to how you get your music now, we'll have. And it's on us to build a service that is better than car ownership. I'm highly confident that we will do that in the next few years.
So what you kicked off when you were writing this post for Medium, which to me was the most exciting idea, is how the world actually looks once you do get rid of private vehicle ownership, whether that's in 2025 or 2035 or whenever. Just sheerly in terms of space, you write in this piece, you say, walk outside and look at how much space around you is dedicated to the car, not just the road, but all the space where cars are parked. We live in a car-first society in I would say almost every city in the United States and most cities around the world. What are the implications of a world where we don't have cars? What happens to that space? You say there's a lot of opportunity, but what do you think happens?
Yeah, I am so excited about this. This is probably one of the largest personal motivators, is the idea of reshaping the land use in our major cities. If you think about, like, even here in New Orleans, it's such an exciting, amazing place to walk around. And the worst part is when you, as a pedestrian, you're scared for your life because there's cars all around you. There doesn't need to be cars like in this like core downtown French Quarter on all the streets. This is like completely unnecessary. We don't need to have parked cars on our roads. And to that first example, we can have a lot less roads to serve people that live in it. When any entrepreneur is building a product or a service, they think about who they're serving. And if we think about our cities that way, the people, the city is serving all of us and not serving a parked car. But the way it looks is that the city is serving a parked car. I think that's a travesty. Mm-hmm. I think it's, if you think about quality of life, if you think about, the costs and the social divide created by car ownership, we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to flip that on its head, and we intend to play a big role in that, and I'm super excited about it.
But I'm still, which is great, but I'm still trying to envision what it actually looks like, because if you think about a neighborhood like Greenwich Village or the French Quarter, and this sort of Jane Jacobs model where everything's very pedestrian and walkable, and then you think about what the car has created, which is so inhuman. Does all of a sudden every neighborhood start trending back towards this hyper-pedestrian thing, or do we have a third wave, a sort of new understanding of a city that doesn't look like life before the car or life during the 20th century auto boom, but actually like a sort of entirely new conception of what public space is?
I think we'll have to adapt existing cities because it'll be too expensive to completely rebuild them, and then new cities can be built without the need for car ownership. But you can look to, for Americans, it's hard to imagine a city that wasn't built for cars because we don't really have many or any. If you look to Europe, you can see some examples where the city was built before there were cars, and those are good reference points. But I don't think it's that hard to both imagine and deliver on changing a way that an existing city in the United States works. Examples that have already happened on a really small scale are, Times Square. They shut down to traffic and to make it more pedestrian friendly, and it's been good for business. The pitch they made to the city was that this would actually improve the flow of traffic around the area. I don't know if there's been a follow-up study, if that's true, but that was part of the idea. There's another example, the Ferry Building in San Francisco. There used to be a giant highway overpass there, and now there's all this local economic activity. It's one of the really exciting places that people go in the city to meet with others or to buy things. So there's like a business case for the city to get rid of it. And there's a lot of studies that say the more roads you build, the more traffic you create. So I think that as we remove parking and make it less convenient for car ownership, less convenient to use and buy an asset that you only use 4% of the time, I think you will see changes.
The 4%, your stats say that 4%, people spend 4%, cars are in use 4% of the time and they're parked 96% of the time on average in the United States?
That's right.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, and you have a sort of test case scenario type thing you guys are working on in Los Angeles? There's like a block on Wilshire?
We worked with an architecture and planning firm to redesign, I believe it was Wilshire Boulevard, just to show people what this could be like. So I think one of the most important things going forward for us and any company is going to be to have the largest impact. You have to work very closely with, there has to be a private and public partnership. And as part of that, I think we want to show a vision of what is possible and then work with local governments to put policy and product in place to deliver that.
And so, what are the findings? What have you found from that block in LA? I mean, like, what?
That was more
thinking?
just like a visual to say, hey,
Yeah.
This could be different. We also have, you can look at previous examples, the Ferry Building in Times Square that I mentioned to see what is the financial impact for local economic activity. What is that you can look at the price of real estate, near the Ferry Building. Obviously, there's lots of other things that have caused it to go up, but if you just isolate that area compared to other parts of the city that have also risen, you'll see that it has risen more in places where you make it more bike and pedestrian friendly. So the challenge, I think the biggest challenge, is to get companies and regulators to work hand in hand. Mm-hmm. That is the biggest thing that can slow this down. Not the possibility of it, not the reality of it. But
it can slow it down. Why? Because you're worried about regulation, or because you're worried about lawmakers giving the green light to things they need to give the green light to?
No, just that it requires these two sides to work really well together.
Yeah.
And like any relationship, that has its challenges because we have our interests and they have their interests. We need to come together. And I think we've shown that, like, as a company, we can work together with regulators. And I think that importance just continues to grow. I mean, we worked with local regulators in the state of California to create the original regulations for peer-to-peer ride-sharing. And now, you have these services all across the U.S., and our government relations team did that across the country.
In terms of pushing this agenda forward, obviously there was sort of this moment that happened a few weeks ago when there was a fatality due to an autonomous vehicle. Now, the ratio for deaths by autonomous vehicle versus deaths by vehicles that people are actually driving would suggest that, not to be insensitive, but obviously that doesn't necessarily need to slow down the progress that's being made in autonomous vehicles. Do you worry about a public perception, a resistance to charging ahead into a world where all of a sudden we're not driving our own cars within the next 7 to 10 years?
Yeah, I'd say like what happened in Arizona was tragic, and we all, as part of the community, need to be careful not to bring technology to market before it's ready to be in market. We are a lot earlier than others in our own autonomous development, and we're doing that on private roads, on private spaces where there aren't pedestrians, and not yet bring it to public. But you also have to keep the context that nearly 100 people die every day in the United States in a vehicle crash. And so at some point, let's say if it's 3 years from now, where it becomes possible to do autonomous vehicles at scale, regulators and business leaders will have a decision to make, and there should be data to prove that by allowing autonomous vehicles that are safe, that do have technology that is ready in certain parts of the city for certain situations, that you can save people's lives. And so yes, we have to be careful as a society to be able to see that full picture, but we also have to be careful as companies not to bring something to market before it's ready.
So we have time for one more issue to dive into, which is not what's happening on the ground, but what's happening in the air.
Yeah.
A lot of the companies that are thinking about the driverless future are also thinking about the future of aviation, of quick aviation, of autonomous aviation. What are you doing in that space, and what is your sort, if you view a world where people really aren't driving cars by 2025, what is the future of us getting into, pilotless helicopters, jets, some form of aviation, and being able to go from, say, San Francisco to Oakland, Malibu to downtown LA? How far away are we from that, or is that not going to happen?
Lyft is doing nothing in air
Why
travel.
not?
There's $2 trillion spent every year on car ownership. That is a major opportunity. We could build the largest company ever built, focused on the United States, focused on ground transportation, and we don't need to. We need to deliver food. We don't need to be a logistics company, and we don't need to, capture people's imagination around vertical takeoff and landing. So it is a massive opportunity that we're committed to, and that's autonomous vehicles. I am 100% convinced that autonomous vehicles at scale will be ready to go around in our cities before vertical takeoff and landing is happening in a meaningful way.
What kind of car do you drive?
My wife and I own a Toyota Highlander.
How soon are you going to get rid of it?
I didn't want to get it, but we also have a 2-year-old.
Don't throw your wife under the bus,
That's right
man.
there.
I'm sorry on his behalf.
So we have a 2-year-old daughter, and so Lyft has more work to do to make it easy to have a kid and not own a car. So it's motivation for me.
Cool.
Yeah.
John, thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you guys for coming out. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.